Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a totally fascinating explainer looking at the crossroads of healthcare operations, patient care, and artificial intelligence. We're going to unpack exactly how purpose-built AI call recovery is bridging this huge gap between lost admissions and severe nurse burnout at behavioral health and addiction treatment centers. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll talk about the late-night phone call. Second, the cost of missed leads. Third, enter AI call recovery. Fourth, real results and outcomes. And finally, Section 5, the compliance elephant. Section 1, the late-night phone call. I want to paint a vivid, high-stakes picture for you of what actually happens after hours. Imagine this. It's 1:47 a.m. A person in crisis. Maybe they're terrified, maybe they're intoxicated, or maybe it's just a totally desperate family member. They finally reach that critical point where they're willing to ask for help, and they call your center. So the absolute critical question you have to ask yourself is who is actually answering that phone? And this brilliantly illustrates the core operational conflict we see all the time, right? The stark difference in responsibilities. Your psychiatric nurse is in the middle of handling medication administration, monitoring withdrawals, and managing behavioral crises. Meanwhile, an admissions representative needs to calmly explain program details and meticulously enter data into a CRM. But because the nurses are usually the only ones in the building overnight, the nurses' station just becomes the default answering service. Honestly, these are two fundamentally different, demanding jobs that should absolutely never compete for one person's attention. Section 2. The cost of missed leads. So what actually happens when your clinical staff are forced to moonlight as your admissions department? Well, let's look at the staggering human cost first. A recent study from Penn Nursing focusing on inpatient psychiatric nurses found a massive 38% reporting high levels of burnout. And this is driven heavily by their work environment. Think about it. When an admissions call comes in, even a brief 5-minute conversation means 5 minutes of divided attention away from actual patient care. That non-clinical burden literally fuels this high burnout rate. And look, there is an equally severe cost on the patient outcome side too, 40%. The data shows that 40% of alumni experience thoughts of relapse within just 90 days of discharge. This massive risk underscores just how absolutely vital it is to proactively nurture those relationships. But let's be real, you simply cannot do that if your staff is way too stretched to even make basic check-in calls. Plus, just telling a late-night caller, hey, call admissions in the morning, fundamentally fails. According to data from SAMHSA, a person's readiness to begin treatment is incredibly fragile. People are facing all sorts of barriers, like worrying about costs or honestly just not knowing how to navigate getting help. If a lead isn't called back within 24 hours, their chance of actually converting drops by 7 times. That is a ton of wasted marketing spend, but so much more importantly is a lost opportunity to potentially save a life. Section 3. Enter AI call recovery. So the crucial point is exactly how we redesign this workflow using a technological solution built exclusively for these highly sensitive environments. A properly designed AI system steps right in to handle that first layer of an admissions conversation, and it does it without ever needing to sleep. It answers immediately, 24/7. It gathers all the necessary information using a really natural, human-like, and empathetic dialogue. Then it comprehensively documents everything directly into your CRM and intelligently routes those high-priority hot leads straight to the right on-call staff member. But boundaries matter here, right? We need to clearly establish the guardrails of this technology. The AI absolutely does not diagnose. It doesn't determine medical necessity, and it certainly does not replace clinical judgment. The system is designed strictly to manage the admissions workflow. Clinical decisions remain clinical decisions, period. Any safety concerns? Those are automatically routed exactly according to your center's approved protocols. And the technology actually goes way beyond just answering the phone. Proactive AI can actively re-engage your entire pipeline. It can run scheduled outbound check-ins at 30, 60, and 90 days to fiercely protect your alumni. It conducts multi-touch lead nurturing. It can even communicate fluently in English, Spanish, and Russian to help you serve way more of your market. And it handles high-risk intervention routing automatically. It does all of this on a scalable schedule that human staff rarely, if ever, have the bandwidth to maintain. Section 4. Real results and outcomes. Okay, we've talked about how it works. Now let's shift focus to the hard data and proven metrics. Just listen to this quote from an admissions director at a leading treatment center. They said, "We were only able to make outbound calls to about 15% of our alumni and 30% of our leads. We didn't have the staff."
This perfectly grounds the data in a very relatable, everyday reality. Centers are paying good money for leads, but their admissions teams are just stretched way too thin to actually reach everyone. Now, what's really interesting here is the financial impact of finally solving that bandwidth problem. Check this out. By recovering just 110 missed calls, one 145-bed behavioral health treatment center was able to protect $17,400 in monthly Google ad spend. Literally, that is revenue that would have otherwise been completely wasted on leads that hit a voicemail and just walked away. I mean, look at these rapid success metrics. They represent a massive operational paradigm shift. A 150-bed center saw their missed calls drop from 85% to absolute zero in week 1. Zero. A 30-bed center experienced a whopping 200% increase in admissions conversations. A multi-site organization saw a 22% engagement rate on a list of 5,000 completely inactive cold leads. And in another wild case, the system actually booked 75 fully qualified calls in just 30 days entirely without staff intervention. Section 5. The Compliance Elephant, HIPAA.
Of course, bringing AI into healthcare naturally brings up some totally valid skepticism around HIPAA. So let's look directly at the strict regulatory framework. We have to start with the Department of Health and Human Services definition of a business associate, or BA. This is a person or entity providing services to a covered entity that involve access to protected health information, or PHI. Basically, any tech vendor that touches your patient data falls directly into this category.
And HHS is super clear on this. AI platforms using PHI are directly liable under HIPAA. They are business associates. This means they absolutely must have a signed business associate agreement in place, and they have to abide by strict security safeguards and breach reporting mandates. No exceptions.
So for the administrators tuning in, you can rest assured when evaluating purpose-built solutions because they natively handled these exact requirements. They include an executed BAA right out of the gate. They implement role-based access controls to severely limit data access to authorized personnel only. They feature secure CRM and EHR integrations where absolutely no data is stored outside the secure environment. And they maintain full, comprehensive audit trails. Let's move to and see how this builds on the specific protections for addiction treatment. 42 CFR Part 2 explicitly protects substance use disorder records to ensure total confidentiality and prevent discrimination. And what is really vital to know right now is that updated rules making these protections even more stringent are becoming mandatory on February 16, 2026. To ensure patient privacy is never ever compromised, dedicated vendors specifically address these HHS and Part 2 guidelines head-on. Take Blueshirt Media, for example. They include an executed BAA, operate purely on least privilege access permissions, strictly adhere to minimum necessary data retention standards, have a rigorously defined incident response process, and require all of their subcontractors to prove full HIPAA compliance before ever touching a single piece of PHI. So let's tie all of this together and synthesize the core message of this explainer. The goal is incredibly simple and clear. Keep admissions calls off the nurse's station. By utilizing AI to create robust, foolproof after-hours coverage, your nurses are finally allowed to just be nurses. They can focus entirely on patient care, and simultaneously, you ensure that no desperate cry for help ever gets sent to voicemail. I'm going to leave you with this final, thought-provoking question to maybe reconsider your own strategy. The real question isn't whether your phone rings after 5 p.m. The question is, what happens after your phone gets answered? Does the caller get real, structured, empathetic help, or do they just get a burnt-out, exhausted nurse taking a quick message? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring how the right technology can completely transform the way you provide care.